Hello, my name is Michael Boyajian, and I'm going to give you my credentials before I do a review of my uncle Gary A. Kulhanjian's monumental opus on Armenian immigration into the United States. But I want to give you my credentials first, not for any ego stroking reason, but just to show you that I know what I'm talking about when I'm doing this review. First of all, I've written over 50 books, and about a dozen of those books have been on narrow aspects of Armenian history: Roman Armenia, Byzantine Armenia, the Armenians in Paris, so forth and so forth. They're all somehow connected to the genocide. Now, let's turn to my uncle. I'm also a retired New York litigator and a former human rights judge for New York State. In any event, my uncle is Gary A. Kulhanjian, is a genocide scholar, a social historian, and an educator. And he's devoted his life to writing this book on immigration. Okay, and how and why the Armenians came here, specifically between the late 1800s and I'd say late 20th century. But he does go forward from there, and he does go back a bit from the late 1800s. Excuse me. For instance, he talks about a Marty the Armenian who somehow ended up at the Jamestown colony and saved Jamestown colony from total failure. He brought with him agricultural knowledge that he taught the settlers there, and the colony was able to survive, and the rest is history. But for one Armenian named Marty the Armenian. In any event, he's worked on all kinds of documents and shipping, ship manifolds of passengers. He's found our own families, names, the ship names, everything. It's all in this book. I just want to show you the book, too. It is a gigantic book, as you can see. Yes, it's gigantic, but it's an important part of our history, not only to Armenians, but to the United States. We've contributed a lot to this society, and he devoted his life to teaching people about the genocide, and he risked his life at times doing lectures around the country about the genocide. There were times when they actually had to have police come in to protect him from people who denied the Armenian genocide. I won't go into any details about that, the 1915 genocide, but he was able to take some satisfaction after 106 years of denial of the genocide, where we lost 1.5 million Armenians in 1915, from the fact that the greatest superpower in the world, the leader of the free world, President Joe Biden, stood up and was the first American leader to say, acknowledge the genocide. It happened, and he acknowledged it. And for me, that's enough. If you have the most powerful person on the planet, of the most powerful superpower in history, saying it happened, it happened. And you know what? That was 106 years after the genocide, and it took the stress off. The big thing with the Armenians was the denial. It was a psychological damage to our psyche over generations. And it's a diagnosed mental illness, in fact, is like depression or other illnesses. Anxiety. It's a form of anxiety, actually. But let's move out of that realm there, and let's talk about how the Armenians did get here. Now, we all are familiar today with the strict immigration rules. There's nothing new about them. They've been with us since the beginning. I mean, when the Irish first came here, they were completely abused by the established Protestant community. If you really want to see what it was about, look at the famous cartoonist from back then, Nash, I think his name is, Thomas Nash, and you can see how they portrayed the Irish. It's a horrible portrayal of them, where they dehumanize them. And so when you see what's going on today, it's terrible, but it's not new. Okay, so how did the Armenians get in here with the strict immigration rules back in the early 20th century, the 1900s? Um, what they had to do is they had to they huddled with attorneys. We got to get in here. We're being slaughtered in Turkey, and we want to come here where there's freedom, where there's safety, where there's peace and prosperity. And what the lawyers came up with was that they had to prove to the federal court that Armenians, and I'm not being a racist, this is not my opinion, this is actually in the decision by the court, that they were indeed classified as white. That was your ticket into this country back in 1909. That's the year of that first case. And the name of the case, and I'll put the citation in the description of this YouTube video, Kulhanjian versus Massachusetts, 1909. And I'll put the citation in there so you can look it up. It was followed up many years later by United States versus Kaleidoscope, again, and that was a 1925 case. Both federal cases, one in Massachusetts, one in Oregon, but federal. And basically the premise was, you're like us, so you can come in. You know, you're white. Okay. So, that's how we got into this country. And again, that's how the legal system works. That was what the lawyers said we had to do. And we had to do it. We were being slaughtered. You got on a boat, and wherever it was going, you had to go. And again, my uncle portrays a beautiful mosaic of the Armenians arriving here and part of the worldwide diaspora of Armenians, which is 5 million people strong, not just in the United States, but in Russia, in Lebanon, in other places around the globe, France, Romania, other parts of Europe, Argentina. It's a worldwide diaspora, not unlike the Jewish diaspora and other nationalities as well. And it's very prosperous. It's very peace and prosperity. Unlike the homeland, which is under siege now by hostile neighbors, and has a population of only 3 million. I think we have to just go on a sidebar here is I think the Armenians living in the diaspora have to say, if you want to preserve your homeland, you've got to start helping out. I'm not saying go over there and put on a uniform, which is what they do in Israel, but you have to go and send money there and stop taking your cruises around the Caribbean and save the homeland. If everyone just gave a few dollars, we can, prop them up so they can protect themselves and protect our homeland, which is one of the ancient homelands. We went toe-to-toe with the Roman Empire for 500 years and survived. Not many ancient people could say that. In fact, the Jewish community was thrown out of what is today Israel for 2,000 years by the Romans. They didn't get back in there until modern times in 1945, after World War II, and they returned to their homeland. And they were kicked out by the Emperor Hadrian, by the way. But anyhow, and the funny thing is, the biggest part of the Jewish diaspora back then was in Rome. So figure that one out. But anyhow, it's a magnificent mosaic that my uncle portrays in this book, and the title is A Kaleidoscope of Armenian Immigration to America, Origins of a Modern Diaspora. And on the cover, he's got one of the beautiful ships that traveled across the ocean to the shores of the United States into New York Harbor, where the first thing they saw was the Lady in the Lake, as they called it back then, the Statue of Liberty. And they then went to Ellis Island and went through, the documentation there, and were most of the time granted entry. Some unfortunate people may have been seasick for weeks on the boat and gotten there and were denied entry for having some type of infectious disease or for some other reason. But again, the Armenians got through most of the time, and the only problem was that a lot of their names were garbled. They weren't really Anglican names, and the Chechen people were not familiar with them. So, like my name, which is considered the Smith of Armenians, Boyadjian, has several different spellings, and that's because what the immigration clerk was checking you in, they didn't get the spelling correct, but that's okay. I mean, they got in. So what? You got to keep your name. You didn't have to change it. But in any event, he goes through all of that, and again, those two federal cases really kicked the doors open and got us in. And this is the second largest diaspora. The largest actually is in Russia, believe it or not. And then you have other, large population centers too. And the diaspora is 5 million in size now because of this immigration. A large part of it to the United States, where they needed labor, they needed professionals, and the Turks were turning their back on Western technology, Western ways. They even turned down the Gutenberg press. They were offered it free by the Europeans, hundreds of presses. They said no. There are reasons why they said no. It was the way the press was unable, the Gutenberg press was unable, unlike our computers today, to properly print Arabic language. It's this kind of a special language, and it's got a flourish to it that the Gutenberg press wouldn't translate, but they just refused anyhow to even do abbreviated language just to get mass copies printed of modern technology books and things like that, and literature and arts and everything else. But the Armenians in Turkey were hungry for Western ways, and were basically the professional class there. And again, there was no desire to take over Turkey. We were a very small minority population, as were the Greeks and Kurds and some other groups. And basically, just before the genocide, we were reassured that everything was going to be okay, and we were going to be respected, our rights and everything, by the Turkish authorities. And that all changed. And that's another story, though. But you may want to contact my uncle if you want to know the details. But in any event, that's what this book is about. It's the journey and his personal experiences with immigration. He was born here, but first generation American. But just to give you a little background, my great grandfather Garibald Kulhanjian was a teacher, and one day I've got a beautiful picture of him. And there's one in the book here, probably, of him, a sepia photograph, taken a few weeks before this incident that occurred at his house. There was a knock at the door, and he answered the door, and he was taken away and never seen again. And what's scary about this photograph is that he has no idea that when this photograph was taken a short time before this knock at the door, he had no idea what was coming down the road at him. And I've seen similar type photographs with John and Yoko Lennon, Yoko Ono and John Lennon, excuse me. There was a photo show in Beacon, New York, here in the Hudson Valley a number of years ago, where it was 6 weeks or 6 months before his assassination. And there's no sign in these photographs of the doom that's heading right for John Lennon. He's in the photographs. He and Yoko are intently working on the Double Fantasy record, which is half her music and half his music combined together to form one. And again, you look at those photographs, and just like my great-grandfather Garibald, they have no idea what's coming at them. But I strongly advise you, please read this book, especially if you are Armenian. This is your history here. Growing up, we had no idea who our heroes were. We just knew about the Armenian genocide and how it was so frustrating that it was denied that it happened. And my father had the best saying of all: if it didn't happen, then where are all my uncles? Gone, all of them. And this book is an important part of our history, as are my books, where I say we did have heroes. Here they are. And I named the kings of Armenia who stood up to the famous Roman generals, Pompey the Great, for instance, Mark Antony, Cleopatra in Egypt, and so forth and so forth. But my uncle is focusing here on the American aspect of the Armenian diaspora and its immigration here. And you're going to learn not just about his family, our family, us Armenian families. Okay? Again, the name of the book is A Kaleidoscope of Armenian Immigration to America, Origins of a Modern Diaspora. And again, my uncle's name is Gary A. Kulhanjian. And I'll put the details in the description of this book on the YouTube video. Thank you. Happy New Year. Let it be a good year. Bye.